Okay, let's review state abbreviator. First, we're going to want to fork over to your own repo, git clone, and again, npx create React app state abbreviator, and here's my React app. That's cd, it's a state abbreviator, and start the npm start to actually run the React server. Here it is. This is our basic React app. And let's look at the state abbreviator requirements. Let's continue experimenting with state, props, and inputs, and transforming arrays. Scaffold, create React app, move state data. So it looks like we've got a bunch of state data directory into the root of this repo into your source directory. Let's go ahead and do that. Compile. So it says code outside the source directory isn't compiled, so you'll get errors if you try to import this file from its default location. All right. So in here, let's move this state data into our source. Move. So here it is. Let's look at what this looks like. It is just a gigantic array with an array of objects with name followed by the state, and then alpha-2 followed by the Alabama, like the two-word alpha state shorthand. We have 50 of them. Cool. So import the state data from state data index and use it to construct a UI. The UI must include a select input / drop-down menu that contains a list of US states, and then a separate component that displays the abbreviation of the selected US state once you select the state from the dropdown. Oh. All right, so app.js, we want to get rid of that, get rid of all that. I just want to say h1, select US, select a state. From the, let's call select state from drop down. So drop down. Let's look at it. Select state from drop down. We don't have anything yet. So it says import the state data from state data index. So I'm going to import, let's call it state data, call it whatever we want, from the path state data. That's all we really need. So again, this is a functional component. And in the functional component, I just want to console log this imported state data to see what that looks like. Here it is. Open up the DevTools. Right here, it's an array of 51. Looks like District of Columbia. It's one of them. All right. Cool. Now, we're going to want to create a select dropdown. First, let's first initialize some state. Since this is a functional component, we're going to use the use state hook. Again, const use state returns two things: the selected state and set selected state equals use state. And right now, the selected state is null. So we get some errors. Selected state is defined but never used. Selected state is assigned but never used. And set selected state. Great. So it said we want a select input dropdown. So select, then Here, we'll have some options, like option Alabama. Let's look at what that looks like. So right here, we have a select drop down with only one option. What we want to do is create a function that loops through the state data array, log state data, and grabs the name and puts it in here like state data.name. So right there it's empty. What if I did state data at index 0 dot name? Cool. So we want to create a function that does that for us. So we can call const display dropdown that let states objects, because it's going to be an array of a bunch of objects, and then state data. So we're going to take in that array. We're going to use map, which takes in two elements. So like the data, like an element, it's called data, and the index. And let's just console log data right now. And in here, and here's where we're going to want to execute this display dropdown. So where's that console log? So we don't need this console log anymore. That console log is all the state data because we already know what it is. So nothing's being dropped down, but we're getting all the objects of the states show up. So we can push state objects dot push, and we can push in that option tag, option. And here we can grab the data dot name with a value. Let's look what that select dropdown example. Selecting. So here's our select. It has an ID of cars and it's got a value. So this is where our data.name is, and the value should be data dot, what is it? Data dot, is it alpha something? Let's look back at index alpha 2. So our value should be data dot alpha 2. And now we're pushing a bunch of these option elements, these nodes, into states objects. So let's console log states objects. Here we go, we got 51 of these. Here's a bunch of state objects with the props, value, Alabama, and children. Oh, interesting. So we just want to return the states objects. And here we go, look at it. So we have the select tag, and within there we're doing some inline JavaScript, which executes the select display dropdown function, comes up here, display dropdown, creating an empty array called states objects, and then we're mapping through that object array, which is this data, grabbing the index, or the data and the index, and we're pushing this option element as a value of data.alpha2 and the data.name into this array, into this array, and then we're returning that array. So 51 of these options will render inside this select tag. That's what's happening here. Great. We have one part done. It says that each child in a list should have a unique key. So we also need to pass in a key. And what's unique about each key has to be unique, and what's unique is the index. Oh, index. There we go. Great. So when we select Kansas, that's not right. Let's change that. Kansas. When we select New Hampshire, or we select, Illinois or Tennessee, we want the abbreviation to show up underneath it. So when the select changes, we want it to execute a function. So we do an onChange handler, React onChange select handler. Select. So here we go. We have a select tag. Does it even work? Good. So it looks like from this the React documentation, which is really good, select as an onChange handler. In this handle change, we change the state. So this is an example of a class component, but we're working in functional component. So we're going to have to change it a little bit. So onChange, the select onChange, call it handle change. And up here, to assign const, let's create an arrow function, a fat arrow function called handle change equals, we need to accept any inputs. Ooh, maybe. Let's see what it looks like. Handle change. Looks like we have to do the same thing, event. Let's call it event. Let's console log events.target value. See what that looks like. I don't know. Okay, oh, look. So when I console logging, I'm selecting like main in the console, the value of the selected option shows up. So the value, which is coming from this value key. Cool. Now we want to set that to our selected state. We want to select that value to our selected state. So we can do set selected state event.target.value. You can return selected state. Expected to return value, an arrow function. Expected to return a value in arrow function. So where does that show up? For line 11. Oh, right here it says line 11, 33. So in this, I think we just want to return. No. Yeah, it's actually return there. All right, yeah. So we wanted to return state objects push. And at the very end, return this. So nothing's happening right now because right here we want to display the state. Let's actually console log selected state just to make sure. When I select Alabama, Alaska, no. Colorado, Arkansas, what? All jacked up now. Alaska is null. Arizona is Arkansas. Oh, that's why. Let's console log it down here. It looks like it renders it. Let's see what it looks like. Event.target.value, selected states. Everything should work. It just depends on like when it's actually rendering. So down here, we can do some other logic like selected state. Right, do some if selected state and selected state. So if not selected state. So if selected state has a value, we can return a div. Div of selected state. State. Else. Oh, got it backwards. Be like a null. Arizona, Colorado, Alabama, Alaska, Florida. Great. Well, if Alabama is already selected, so I have to like select something else first before I select Alabama. So instead of this null here, we can just do if selected state is true and div.selected state. So essentially if this is true and this is true, which this always defaults kind of to true because it'll be something. Arizona, ID. So instead of a div, let's do an H1. Ooh. There we go. Iowa, Indiana, Alabama. So now, kind of pretty much have it working. Can we do anything differently? Let's pass in a child component. So instead of this part, let's just have a component that just displays the state abbreviation. So in sorts, I'm going to create another directory called components. And here, I'm going to say state.js. And I'm going to create this RSC, create a stateless component. And I'm going to render something in here. H1 here. So split the screen, get rid of that. So instead of here, I just want to render essentially this component. State. Already imported it from imported state from components directory state. So here, 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 but I want to actually display the state. So this is where props comes in. Let's pass down some props into the child component from the parent component app. So state, we can do selected state, or we can call it like user selected, user select equals selected state. And here, so I'm passing user selected. So I can pass in props. Let's just console log props console log props. And here's user selected. This is our property. So app is our parent, app.js is our parent component, state is our child component. We're passing down props. So we're literally passing down app state of selected component down as a prop to the state component. And in here, do destructuring. So we just want to grab the user selected. I like to keep all these kind of like the same so we're not confusing ourselves. So selected state, let's actually call it selected state. Destructuring selected state. And here we can actually just pass in selected state. I clean this up, get rid of the spaces. So functional component, this is also a functional component. Functional component. Now, District of Columbia, Michigan, very cool. So we're passing selected state, which is the app, JS, the app component, the app component state. We're passing it down as a property to the state component. And we're destructuring it. So we're just grabbing the selected state. We can also, so yeah, we're just destructuring, grabbing the selected state, putting the selected state in here. We can also do just props. Then we would need to do, to access that, we can do props.selected state. App, Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas. Great. Let's kind of pretty it up a little bit. How do we want to do this? So, how can we do this? Selected state. So I'm going to go back to destructuring. I don't like this dropdown, this native dropdown. I'm going to use a library called React Select. That can create really unique dropdowns that have searchable, clearable, loading, a lot of different functionality. So getting started, I'm going to kill the server, do npm install React Select library. I'm gonna load it, and I want to change this select property to use this React Select dropdown. All right, so let's run that server again. I'm just going to totally delete this select. And in order to use it, I need to import the select from React Select. So I'm going to import select from the React Select library. And right here, I'm going to render the select dropdown. See what it looks like. Ooh, that's a lot better. A lot better looking. However, there's no options yet. So how do we get the options in there? Well, we've got to kind of read this in documentation. It looks like const options need a value and a label, and then the select, the React select component just takes in a keyword of options, and you just pass in the options. But I guess you need the value and the label. Interesting. So, looks like our state data, or our current state data work with that. We have name in alpha 2. We can actually change that to be something else to emulate what's required from the React Select we need a value and a label. So if we just changed it to label as Alabama and the value is just Al. So I just changed the default data that was given to us, just changed the keys for label and value. Rect select, still nothing because we need to add this options. Select, so I like to do that, and then options isn't options because we're importing the state data. See if that works. Display dropdown is assigned but never used. Handle change. Display dropdown. So, okay. The handle change. Oh, look at that. There is our dropdown. Pretty easy. Look how much code it took. Just that. But now we need to do an on change. So when we change it, it executes. So you don't even really need this anymore. Comment that out. We just want to handle this. So on here, we do like on change equals handle change. So I don't know what's actually being passed in here. It could be, there could be an event. Let's look at so documentation, on change, nothing, props, on change. Okay, there's a bunch of on change. Default value, no. Input string, menu, value, on change function. Let's do value. I don't know what's actually being passed in here. I'm gonna comment all that stuff out. And just console log value. Set select, that's fine. So I'm just kind of trying to pretty this up. Cool, so every time I select it, on change, the value is the label and the value. So value dot value. So if I change it, Arkansas, Colorado, Delaware, Arizona, great. So now I can just do value dot value. I don't like the way, I don't like value dot value. I put like input dot value, and then I can return the selected state, and pretty much everything else is the same. I just kind of refactored it to use this React library. Arizona, Colorado, Delaware, just kind of make it look a little more appealing. It's kind of wide though, but we can deal with it. So we just have two functional components. Let's refactor this one and make it a, not refactor, let's just change it to a class-based component. So I'm gonna go down like that. Class component, kind of easy. You can do, let's comment that out. Everything. So class component class app extends component. Need to bring in component up here. We're no longer using use state because use state is only used in functional components. We can just do state equals the selected state equals null. Is that what it initially was? Yep, null. Get rid of this const handle change. And now we also need to return or use the render function because it's a class component. The render function returns all the stuff, all the JSX. We're gonna get some errors. So selected state, since we're no longer using that in a functional component, we have to use this.set state. And selected state equals input.value. And we can return this. I don't know if we need to return anything. Handle change is not defined. So we can do this, because this is a class, we need to know the instance. And then selected state, we can do this.state.selected state. And likewise with the this.state.selected state. So no more actual errors, just a couple of warnings. Use state, defined but never used because we converted it to a class component. Everything still works the way it does. Now let's just convert this functional component into a class component, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but let's just do it for fun. Class components are generally only used when you need to declare some state. So do import component. So const state, let's do class state. Extend component. We need the render. Move that all up. But now we're dealing with some props. So constructor, pass some props, super props. Then we do this dot props selected state. This is useless constructor. So we don't even need the constructor because props is always just passed down. Great. That's it. I will stop the recording.